Esports Podcast, Noun. A 2-hour-long video full of banter and nonsense where the guests are only introduced halfway through and the outro makes you think your internet's died.
Right, we're here for another episode of Daring Minds, the show where our minds dare to ask things or talk to people. It's more like the show where someone dares to come into Valorant, a game he's not from, and then just start talking to people while lightly provoking them to talk shit about their teammates, ex-teammates, rivals, other people in the game, maybe even the people who develop the game, maybe even the people who you would want to hire you to a show. It's actually almost sort of like a tightrope type exercise coming on this show. It might be awesome, might be a great show, might be ruin your whole career, might end everything. Who knows? And that's sometimes that's the pep talk I have to give myself just doing the show. So okay, our guest for this one is mCe, who, spoiler, I know how I set these shows up. Like, we have talked many times on this show, right? And what I do is, at the moment, while I don't really have like my own strong opinions about Valorant, I just pretend that me and Gio like fucking hive-minded our opinions, and I just share her opinions for now. So basically, this is secretly mCe, like a guard fan show. Like, we are actually, we low-key hate Sentinels. We don't really, but they're going to have to come on the show eventually if they want to change that. And also, we all know anyone who doesn't say Sentinels number one just hates them. We low-key hate Sentinels, so we're good boys at that. And we also love the guard because we're all hipsters, obviously. You know, like, we can't just like all the fucking popular teams like Optic, or we actually do low-key like Optic as well. But, you know, this is our hipster pick, is the guard. That's secretly the team that should be the best. And if the results aren't, even better for the hipsterism, because then obviously, like, you guys can't see sort of the eye test of why they're so good, but didn't win or do anything at VCT. So let's get into the topic, mCe, because I just had Stale on the show. Then we had Vanity as well. So we've had a few of your sort of...
we're just going down the list.
We've had a few of them.
The boys.
Yeah, but actually I want to start there, because here's the thing, mCe, is... people might not know this, but even though in CSGO, coaching obviously is like a legit job and it's a big thing, etc., because of the scene you were coming up in, which was the next tier of NA teams, unfortunately, no one knows any of the lesser-known coaches, unfortunately, in CSGO. And in your case particular, I actually think what did you dirty, it's because you were on a Steel team. Everyone just assumes Steel must run everything, and he's got the big brain, and the coach is almost like his assistant or something. So give me some thoughts. Like, in CSGO, I've actually heard, like, low-key behind the scenes, people actually thought you were pretty good, and you were sort of on your way to getting to a better spot before you came to Valorant.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is I wasn't that good at the game, honestly. I made decent levels, made professional, but like, if you make professional and don't win a game, is it like, does it really count, you know, type deal? And then I got the chance to help Cadian at the time and Hiko at the Global Challenge in New York City while we were playing there, and they had to play relegation with Rogue, and I talked to them for a little bit, and they were like, you know, if you ever consider coaching, you sound like you know what you're talking about or whatever, you know, why don't you come work for us? And I was like, I can't give away my chance to play pro. This is what I've worked for, you know, for so long. And then after I got cut because I was shit, I was like, okay, I'm going to go over and try to do this because my mind for the game is much better than my individual ability by far.
The thing is, though, that's super famous if people don't know. Like, the joke is, in CSGO in particular, by the way, there's actually tons of people who actually apparently never will be a coach, like Pronax and all these legendary in-game leaders. And the problem is, I've talked to so many pros like this, and they told me, essentially, like, they said it's so extreme, the difference between coaching and actually playing the match. They said, even if I sort of suck, I'd rather just believe the dream that one day I could be good and then I'll win the championship. Whereas they said, I'm sorry, like, if you've been someone who's ever a pro, like, even winning, like, essentially the world championship as a coach just doesn't feel like it's going to be as good as being a player. Do you agree? Is there like a resistance? Because it feels like no one wants to do it out of choice.
Well, the thing is, like, I believe in setting goals and different things, and I was very realistic with my goals that I was like, you know, I'd like to play pro, I'd like to play in a major tournament, and my biggest one was like, I really want to play at a minor. That was like the thing that I strive for, because realistically with like my ability level, I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to get a play at a major. I don't know if I'm good enough to do that. Like, obviously every match I go into, I'm going to try and like get to that point. But I was like, I want to play at a minor. And then once I hit that goal, it's like, okay, I've played at a minor. Like, maybe now I can play at a major. And so all of my goals, and I'm a little bit older than my peers in the scene. I'm 31 now. So it was like I was getting older and older, and I was never that good at like the high levels. So it was like I accomplished all the things I wanted to do. So like my motivation at that point wasn't as strong, and I didn't feel fair to some of my younger teammates after like the team that we made pro on to come back and play again. Like I felt like I could better suit a team in terms of coaching. And when I went with Rogue, we placed second at DreamHack Austin and had a chance to win it off the bat. We qualified for the London Minor. We qualified for the London Major Challenger stage as well. And so it was like, even though I didn't get to experience that as a player, like, I'm just very proud of like anything, because there's so few people that, I know it sounds dumb, but it's like, that make a minor. Like, that's special to me. You can't take those things away from me. And it's like, I really appreciated those things. Even as a coach, it was like very special to me to be able to travel and participate in, we didn't make the actual major, but we made the major challenger. We got stickers in the game. And that's like an incredible thing to know that it's like something you were a part of forever will be in the game of Counter-Strike.
I feel like this is really makes me want to ask this question. And as Duncan and I, who have both worked as broadcast talent, very familiar with this topic of conversation. But you describe yourself as not having been that great at actually playing the game, and then you went into coaching, you had a better mind for the game. How did you ever get shit from people where, people are like, people shouldn't be coaches or casters if they can't actually like play at the highest level? Like, how do you feel about that sort of conversation? Because I know how I feel about it.
I don't think I did, because even though like I wasn't good in professional, my team still made professional. Mm-hmm. We won MDL in NA. Like we did really well in our region, so it was like I knew a lot of the people coming up, and if they ever talked to me or anything like that, it was more so like, oh wow, like he's not an idiot, like he does understand this or this. So like, I wasn't that good, but I still played at like upper tier levels. I upset teams in qualifiers, complexities, like these lower tier teams, and like had that respect of like, yes, I wasn't the best player, but like I obviously knew something about the game. So I didn't run into that as much, but I always compare it to basketball, that some of the best basketball coaches of all time were not good basketball players. Like, I don't believe that you have to be insane at the thing that you're teaching in order to understand it. There's so many people with, different, it doesn't click in their physical ability, but like they can teach you how to do it better than like anybody else. You don't have to be an expert at the thing to be an expert at teaching the thing. And it's kind of like an oxymoron, but it is true.
I totally agree with you. I'm going to go back and clip that once this is finally published and just put it on Twitter with no comment.
No, it's definitely a good one for sure. No, I would even say I'll take that point and I'll expand it a bit. I would even say actually, mCe, I found sometimes, I even think this applies to the sports example, sometimes it can actually be an impediment that someone was really good at the game and then they try and become a coach, because the problem is once they can no longer use any of their athletic or physical abilities, so in the case of the esports game, we're talking about like raw aim, mechanics, etc., all of a sudden you essentially have to, like, the mind part's just the chess angle of like the correct decision, what's right to do here, gauging things like how should a less skilled player play. Sometimes really good players have a hard time with that, I've noticed. In fact, I'd even say generally, like basketball's one of the main sports I follow, the best coaches generally seem to be the guys who were role players when they were a pro, because I imagine it's a mixture of, they know they weren't the best, so you have to strategize anyway to sort of get ahead in the game, and being a role player effectively means understanding the system that the team runs and what my place within it is, and like how to help my star player do these things. Whereas, I mean, to bring it right back to the Valorant and tactical FPS games, mate, there have been so many teams in history where a fan will think, like, I'll give you an example, like Forest, oh, he's the best player, his aim's so sick. It's like, mate, if you sat Forest, I'm not joking, down next to his in-game leader and had them both watch a demo and explain what they're seeing, you would think Forest was like a little kid compared to the in-game leader. Not in the sense that, like, he's an idiot, but, like, he's not having to think about any of these things. Like, I actually think low-key, like, it's nearly always, I think, people who are, essentially, you had to grind as a player. That's the guy you want as a coach, I think. That's the right mentality. If you can do it if you're a star player, fair play, you did an amazing transition. But I think it's actually harder in some ways. Like, I actually think being a natural in some elements of the game might limit them, dude.
Yeah, I think I think the better people for that would be like overachievers or overreachers. It's like, or were they a C student and they got A's, or were they an A student and or C student and they got B's, or were they an A student and they got B's? Like, I think there's a difference.
Right.
Where it's like my individual level in Counter-Strike, I would say I was the C student, but my results and everything were, a B or higher. So it's like, I was very proud of that, but like, I always felt like I overachieved for my ability level, and I don't think people ever get to that point. I think they very frequently underachieve with, like, I look at my individual skill versus others, and I was like, oh my goodness, like if I was as good of an aimer as this person or whatever, like I would be incredible. But because I wasn't that good of an aimer, I found different ways to play in terms of positioning and off angles or setting up flashes or being the nerd with smokes and things like that. So like moving into coaching was incredibly natural for me as an IGL as well. So it was like, I do agree with the support player. Like, I think they think about the game differently and see the game differently than potentially a star opper. All the opper I may know is like, I'm going to hold this angle, I'm going to ask for this flash, I'm going to do this. And it's like, I'm just going to hit my shot. Where the support player is like, okay, I have to position here. If they do this, like they have to think of the next 3 steps that's happening versus the opper is just like, okay, I'm asking for a flash and then I'm pinning. So, but I mean, you know, mechanical ability, like Kerrigan got shit for years, and it's like that would be a guy that I would want as a coach.
Oh,
you know,
for sure.
All these people would be incredible. So,
I think it's crazy because, like, to me, it seems very obvious that you can be someone who is mechanically skilled, intuitive in the moment, like whatever, really good at applying knowledge like that. And you can just be a person who's very, I mean, especially from the perspective of a commentator, it's like, I'm a very academic person. I have a very academic background. I'm a good researcher. So I can learn something from a third person perspective, but that doesn't mean I'm good at applying it when I'm in the moment, right? Yes. So like in the argument of like, you know, casters to, you know, that kind of skill, it's like, I don't fucking need to be able to shoot, you know, and I can't. And so I always find it really interesting when that's like applied to coaches as well, because I feel like, yes, there are a number of coaches who come from having a background in being pro. And I think that does provide a unique advantage in the sense that there is a certain level of the system that you're going to understand having experienced it yourself. But also you need to have a very specific skill set to actually succeed as a coach, because you could be the most knowledgeable player ever. It's not even like, oh, you know, let's pick out the mechanical god who doesn't really know that much. But like, you could be the most knowledgeable person ever. But if you can't communicate that, or if you can't tap into other people's ways of working, if you can't see through their decision making and see steps ahead of their decision making, you're probably still going to be a shit coach. Maybe not a shit one, but you're probably not going to be as great as you could be. And so to me, it's always seemed very obvious that these different roles require different skill sets. And I always find it very like interesting when there are people, especially people within esports, not just random fans, who try to argue that what makes you the best player in the server is the exact same skill set that's going to make you a good coach or a good commentator.
I'd even say as well, I'd throw this in there, dude, which is like a normal fan, someone who hasn't been behind the scenes in any way in the esports industry. Like you could speak to this, but they would be shocked. Like if I told them all, you know, they know from stuff like Reddit, like roughly what kinds of salaries people make, and that everyone makes enormous amounts of money compared to what we'd all make if you were some 22-year-old kid flipping a burger. Yeah, everyone gets that, right? So they do this stupid thing where they go, well, because they imagine themselves in a fantasy world being in that position, they're like, well, I bet they all like, I bet it's like the NFL. I bet they like watch every game. Like, mate, if you knew how many star players, even in games like Valorant, don't ever, I mean, there are no demos, but don't ever attempt to scout a game. They're not trying to, like, you know, in the NFL, like, they're going to watch every, like, the fucking wide receiver watches all the, like, fucking how the defensive system's set up in this game, what they're going to, they don't watch any of this shit. By the way, this isn't a Valorant specific thing. Even in CSGO to this day, most of the superstar players, you know, the players you all love, I'll even tell you some of the names, the fucking Nikos of the world, they're not watching a demo. They don't watch a POV demo. To me, it's mad, dude, because I have to say, I'm like you. I came from the world where I had to grind to get everything I have in this life. So I think the same thing. I look at like a Nico or something. I'm like, brother, if I had your skills and my work ethic, mate, this game would be over. So like, that's one thing I think would shock people is like, actually, there's a big thing to this day coaches do. On some level, they're still the demo analyst. It's crazy. Like pro players, it's hard to get them to interact with that side, sort of the nerd side of the game.
Yeah, or just the things you bring to practice in terms of an execute where it's like, seeing a team do something like Tyloo's the first one I can think of that was widely adopted, where it was like on Mirage they threw the wall strat of smokes, and they were, you know, I'm pretty sure they were the first team in the world back in 2014 or whatever when that happened. But it's like you typically had one person, whether it was the IGL or whether it's the coach or whatever, that goes in, finds that, and you're like, okay, now I'm going to bring this to practice. I'm going to teach every single one of the players their lineup, and then you just like hope they all remember the lineup, basically. I mean, the thing in NA we used to joke about is, FPL players, half of them only knew a top stairs smoke in Mirage. But to be fair, I think I could still miss the jungle smoke,
for sure.
half the time. That one's just the hard one, but any other smoke on the map I'm good for. But it's like, it's incredible how many players just in the game are like, you ask them like, oh, can you throw a window smoke? It's like, no. Like I can throw top mid. It's like, how do you not know at least the next step of that, or whatever? And yeah, I truly believe that there's some people that have probably never used the demo system in CS:GO, and even if they are watching demos, do they know how to actually watch a demo and get value out of it? A lot of people see, like back in the day, they see Get Right Lurking, and they're like, okay, I'm going to do that. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's fine, and you're going to be in the right places sometimes, but you have to understand what's happening in terms of where are his teammates, what's happening on the map. Like, you can't just watch your favorite player and hope to understand what's happening. You need to watch your favorite player, and when he does something, look at everybody else and be like, okay, why would he do that? Or what did they see that like caused them to make this play or whatever? And there's a lot of people that never think that extra step ahead. They're just like, I see him do this, I'm going to do this. I see Nico or, all these people play these spots, I'm going to play these spots. And it's like, you need to broaden your view when you watch a demo to truly get the best out of it. And I don't think a lot of people understand that, definitely at lower levels, but even some at the top.
Feels like you must also, that must be an area where Valorant rewards, I would imagine, even more doing all this research, right? Because since there's the whole mob element of like, what comp do they play? How do they set it up differently to other people? It's like in CS, to me, when you watch the demo, you usually either watching for like a specific anti-strat, like, oh, if they do this, maybe I'll watch for that early in the round. Or you're just looking for general tendencies, that they like this sort of a tempo, this pace. Again, the maps are the same, but I feel like in Valorant, it must reward even more the people who really nerd on the fucking replays or whatever.
It definitely does. I think it's annoying because I remember a time in CS, I used a program called Rewind that was fantastic, and I was one of the first probably 20 people that used that, and I attribute that to a lot of our success at tournaments because you're on a condensed time format.
Was this the one where it could take like, it just did like a really fast overview of like, you could do like all the pistol rounds or something? Was it something like that?
I've
tried a lot of these programs. I'm trying to remember which
Shadow GG was incredible. That like you could select like pistols and look at all their pistols and see the dots go everywhere. Rewind was just, they literally built their own demo viewer and they built their own 3D models for every map in Counter-Strike so that you could watch demos and it didn't break. Because everybody that's ever watched the demo knows how bad the CSGO demo viewer was at that point. But in Valorant, it's much harder because you don't have like that replay system, so we rely on VODs. There was a point we played Cloud9 when I was on Jinji. They played, I think it was like 25 maps in a row or like 17, something absurd. Not a single stream. They won an NSG tournament, and it's like, how is that not streamed? But Game Changers was going on, and that was NSG's primary focus.
Right.
So it's like we went into one of these, challenger stages completely blind against a team that it's like, we had no idea what they were going to do.
That's wild.
And like, that's such a disadvantage in terms of when you're a top team versus some of these lower tier teams, because if I want to watch some of these teams like, the Brimstone Gamings of the world or whatever, that can upset us, I can't do that. But they can watch everything we do in terms of like, they're going to know our tendencies, what we do. But I think the great equalizer in Valorant is you can go into a match, and if they switch one agent out or something, it can drastically shift how the game operates. So it's like your counter-strategy and everything like that is good, but it's a lot harder than in CS, where in CS it was like, when they throw this smoke, if they throw this flash, it means they're probably working this, or even counting flashes and smokes in CS was like hugely beneficial. And that's how I did my anti-stratting. It was like, you look at, did they throw one flash? Their mid take, they threw 3. They're obviously faking their mid take. In Valorant, like the only thing you can really go off of a lot of the time is, smokes or a recon dot or things like that. And if that's what your tell is, and you come in, for instance, we played Ghost Gaming, we had really good tells against them, and they played an entirely, like 5 different people going into that match. So it's like every tendency you might have had, all of a sudden you're like, well, shit, like we have no idea how they're going to play now. They're playing something that forces them to play the game a different way, which is like kind of frustrating, but it's like also exciting about Valorant that it's like, it opens up the possibilities in terms of, what can happen.
Sure. Oh, by the way, did you have something, Joe?
I was just gonna say, like, what you were just saying then about not seeing Cloud9 get streamed for so long reminds me of an argument that comes up so many times, and I've seen it in other games as well, not just Valorant, but it does come up in Valorant during particularly the VCT qualifiers, where you obviously have the massive brackets, and so like whoever gets streamed gets picked by whomever. And that is the argument of like there will be teams who are like upset that they're getting streamed. I was just curious what your opinion on that is, because understandably for the teams who do get streamed, they're going to see that as a disadvantage. But then obviously from the broadcast perspective, like they want to show the most exciting games, which means typically certain teams are the ones who do get streamed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just built into the pressure of the ecosystem where it's like you're expected to win despite all these different things. I think it is a disadvantage, but you also have to win your games no matter what. I've been in that situation where every one of our games gets streamed, like I said, and like, yeah, it is a disadvantage, but like at the same time, half of those qualifier games, it's like the first 1 or 2 rounds, you're probably not, playing it, full strength or whatever. You may not be doing certain executes or, even in CS when you play qualifiers, you're like, okay, we have this brand new B exec, but we know we're going to probably beat this team, so let's not use that until we get to
save it. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that happens a lot, especially in the early rounds of VCT, when people get streamed, because you watch just the comps people are playing. That's the funniest thing. The first couple rounds, you're like, okay, are they trolling or is this actually the comp? Because there's some teams that, were running god-awful agents and stuff like that just because they know they're going to win, they're going to have fun, and they don't reveal as much that way. But yeah, it's unfortunate, and that's why I think a replay system is needed to even like the playing field. And I just think strategic depth and understanding of the game is hampered until like that is available for a lot of people.
By the way, on that topic, because obviously there's another aspect you have to deal with. I mean, funnily enough, it was the world you came from in CSGO, but normally people who are at the level you're now in Valorant, in CSGO, you get to skip that. You get to be like a partner team. You just join the tournament. Or there's 2 spots, but you're not competing in those nightmare open qualifiers. Sadly, Valorant just is open qualifiers into VCT until they bring in the next phase. And one of the things that I've always found has been really tricky about that, if people don't understand, is not only, like he says, do you know almost nothing about some of the early round teams, which remember might have a couple of up-and-coming players on. They might actually be like half decent, and so the joke is they actually might have a chance of beating you, but you have all the information disadvantage. And basically there was a point where Lurpis, Tommy, who was a guy who was a famous Finnish Counter-Strike player, and he now I'm just saying for the viewers here, and now works with Immortals Gaming Club, which is the MIBR brand in CSGO. Right, basically, he used to actually have a theory, which is when he used to be in NA as a pro at the end of the 2000s, like 2010, 2011 was his era, he was in an NA team. He used to go through loads of these scenarios where you play all these people where it's like you should beat them, but they could in theory upset you. And he actually used to have a different philosophy. He actually used to think one of the problems was that teams just sometimes would say, right, well, since we don't know them, just play how we normally play, just essentially ignore them, play like a proper game, and because we're better, we're going to win, right? He actually personally thought when you play like the meaningless games against the ones that shouldn't in theory beat you, he actually said against them, you should just pog and just play skill, just make them like beat you with headshots. If they can actually just straight up like play the normal meta and just headshot you all, they probably deserve to win that game. Like that's the one time you wouldn't even be sad losing. Like, what do you think on that angle? Because I almost do feel like I won't be too cynical here. Like they don't do it all the time in top tournaments, but even in big lands in Counter-Strike, if people don't know, there's an element of this when the top team plays like the lowest seeded team in the first match. Like they definitely don't like play the proper game. To some degree, they're trying to do something like this to make it less of like sort of a mismatch. So what do you think on that topic? Because I've wondered what people would think of Valorant, since you're gonna face this every season, it seems like.
I'm gonna talk about Steel with this, because Steel is the worst one with this, and like Vanity and I are the exact opposite on that team, where we always used to joke, and there's kind of a joke that Joshua Nissan, no matter what match he's in, has a 50% chance of winning and a 50% chance of losing. It can be the best team in the world or an open level team, and he literally goes into that match with a 50% chance of winning or losing because he wants to play the game the right way. And against some of these lower level teams, like what you were saying, Lurpus said, you just run at them. They can't stop you. You're more skilled in that. And like Vanity has the exact opposite approach, where it's like if he doesn't think you're good, he's gonna run it down at you. And it's so funny to me that you brought that up because of those two and their past on the show. But yeah, Joshua, like Steel, we used to joke that it's like a 50-50 every match that they're in, and he proved it. I mean, Ghost upset Navi at tournaments,
Sure, yeah,
and then
for
they
sure.
turn around and lose
Yes.
to like Podunk Gaming and MDL. So
Yes.
but yeah, I think in Valorant, it's a lot easier for teams. Like you look at some of the best players in the world in terms of Valorant, and it's like they are incredibly skilled players. But if you look at as simpler as IWoo, it's like you don't get that same carry effect or whatnot. Like every single duel I take against Simple, I'm going to lose that duel. Like 99 out of 100, 90 out of 100. Like I may get lucky sometimes, but I think in Valorant, instead of it being, he's winning that 90 out of 100 times, it might only be 70 or 80. So he's still winning a significant amount of those duels, and he's a very skilled player. But the way the game plays and everything like that, I think it's easier for like it to be equalized sometimes because of utility and some of the different things that can snowball games. And just the way games snowball in general, you lose pistol, the way the ultimate's built. In CS, that isn't a thing. You can always come back from these matches, but it's like your second gun round in CS, if you're down 0-4, is incredibly important. In Valorant, if you're down 0-4, you're going into that gun round against some of these ultimates that can solo win rounds. So it's like the snowbally effect in Valorant is very real. So like the upset potential is much higher in this game, I think, than it is in other titles. And
sounds like it's a bit more like, the old, this is a couple of years back now, but the old meta in Counter-Strike basically was more like what you're describing now. It was the reset meta, right? Where essentially like there's like 3 or 4 key rounds where if you can essentially win that round, like it's almost like you get double the rounds in the game because you're going to get so many, like you say, scenarios where they have no economy, where they have to double save. Like back in the day, Counter-Strike wasn't like, even though I win 16-10, it's usually more like, what did I do on these 4 key gun rounds, basically? Like nowadays they get into a bit more equalised, and each round you have guns almost all the time.
Yep.
Is it more akin to that? Like there's like essentially like a set rounds you need to win in Valorant almost?
When you're making a comeback, like in CS, it was the same thing during that time where it was like you were winning in a lot in a row, but if you lost a single round and you got your econ reset, especially as CTs, you were screwed. And like in Valorant, you're making these comebacks and you see them, like certain ultimates are coming up that you're like, oh God, we're like, you might be on 10 or 11 or, like even they're on 12 with the potential to win. And it's like, shit, we know we have to get through this round. Like if we can get through this round of these ultimates, we will make this comeback. But like it becomes, like you go from playing a normal team to like, oh God, now I have to play ZywOo on the op, Simple on the op, like all these different things in that round that it's like, it becomes so much more difficult to win some of those key rounds down the stretch. But if you can do that or get them to waste it ultimate or win a big round when they use those, then like you're set for the next, 3 to 4 to 5 rounds, which is enough in a game where it's first to 13 that you can overcome that. But yeah, the reset meta I think is a perfect example because it was like when you saw upsets, it like I think after the econ changes, you never saw as many like 16 2s, 4s, 5s. All the games were a lot closer after that point. And I'm sure if you look up statistical data, it'll back that up.
I find it interesting how you talk about that in Valorant, there's always that chance to have the upsets and that things, obviously like ultimates or whatever can be a big switch. So even if you are like the worst team of the two, there's still that chance. I find that like it really aligns with, having especially casted some of the earlier rounds in like these VCT qualifiers and whatever. The biggest thing that you notice if you really had to categorize like how do I know if this team is going to lose is it's always the effectiveness of utility usage or like the what's the best way of putting it? Like, or I guess the economy of utility usage. Like if you are using more utility than your enemy team is and they are still either matching or getting more out of it than you, then you're going to lose.
The efficiency.
So yeah, there you go. I knew it began with a fucking E.
All right.
And yeah, but that's exactly it. Is like that's you can have like utility usage that does swing it, and it does, even if you end up losing, but it's like a 2-1 in a best of 3, for example, like it's still always going to come down to, that's the biggest mistakes that you'll see in those like lower level teams in the early parts of brackets, is that they throw more into a game, they don't get as much out of it, and then they have to spend their money to build that stuff back up. Meanwhile, the team who's been more efficient with it doesn't have to worry about that, so they can kind of build on that, and then as a result, they're not spending all their money, so they can use that money to replenish their guns or whatever. And especially like if you see a real disparity between two teams, like you can see that like worse team use ults, not get much out of them, or even be like countered by just standard utility. But it still always comes down to that utility usage.
Yeah, I think a bigger thing in terms of the upper level and lower level teams is post match. It across both games, it's the same. Our team, especially when I was coming up, was like we could win any round, 2v5s, 3v5s, whatever. It didn't matter. We always had a chance in rounds. And when we got to Pro League, all of a sudden, you're not winning those. And like we didn't notice save, we didn't notice, like we didn't do these things. We just always went for rounds because like we were capable of winning them. And then once you hit a certain level, like these lower level teams and their practice and stuff like that in VALORANT, it's like, oh, we've done this execute with these ults and that works. But it's like all of a sudden you play somebody that has an equal or greater understanding of the game and equal or more skilled players, and that changes in terms of, they're going to bait you with fake reloads. They're going to fake footsteps. They're going to do all these little things that it's like against a tier, 2.5, tier 3 team in an A especially, when you play those teams in practice, because they may not get access to play the upper tier teams. They have no idea what it's like in a lot of these situations, that it's like they could be just as good of players in a lot of situations. Like your top ranked players can be as good as some of these top players, but the mind isn't there. The why, the understanding, and that's such a huge difference at the top level that people don't understand, is like, oh, I can use this ulti for like no reason at a minute 30 in a round and get information with it, and that's good, which it could be, but like if you use that same ulti at 40 seconds in a round, like you completely blow up the previous minute that the team has spent setting up the round, where it's like Sky Deceivers, it tells you where 3 players are on a map, which is incredibly valuable, especially on maps like Split, where they typically work an area, fake that area, get control, fall back in a default, and then hit something else. Or if you use that ulti at 115, they could still be in middle, but if you use it at 40, they're probably very close to where they're going to be to end the round. And like, as a team that gets seekered, you're like, oh shit, like we have to go like now. And it messes with their timings. One of their teammates may not be back. One of their pieces of util may not come back. And I think that's, like you were talking about, the biggest difference between top tier teams is like the util differences and just efficiency in general between those teams.
That's one thing I'm interested to know about, actually, is again, from how, like, as a coach, you actually look at the game in that regard. Because obviously another difference in Counter-Strike, we were talking about this a little bit with Steel, in the fact that, like, unlike in CS, like, obviously people can do stuff like see through the fucking wall, like that's actually a real ability in the game. Well, that's another element we don't have obviously in CSGO, which is because it's a Riot game. I noticed they brought in from League the whole wacky aspect of, like, if you don't know, in League of Legends, people can go invincible for periods of time, you can't target them, they're invisible, like all sort of vulnerable, all magical shit basically that wouldn't normally be in a game, right? It must be weird, like essentially, like some of the ults like totally change what you want to do at that point in time, or if they have or haven't used it, it's like night and day whether what you can even do in the game now. Like you're saying there, like you can't just wait and old school Counter-Strike wait till the end of the round and then sneak in at the last second and put the bomb down like Luminosity used to every bloody single time when the Fallen and those guys were at their prime. You can't do that in this game, can you? Like there's certain other, essentially like you're saying, there's other factors that can become a pressure or a timer on what you do.
Yeah, it's like, it's the same thing. You could be a team that isn't as great at defaulting, and you have a Sova drone or a Sova recon that gives you the information for free or safe that before the nerfs to it, like you could clear out almost an entire bomb site at times with the drone, where it's like good luck playing that site. You already have a limited amount of places to play. You're going to have to play against a full execute half the time, and they know where you are. Like, so yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. But just in terms of defaulting, I think is the biggest change, or like sight hits. If you get a good scan off with a flash that gives you a audio indicator, recon that gives you the ability to see them through a wall or something, like it changes the round entirely. If I know somebody is, new box on Inferno versus they could be new box emo first, coffin, coils, whatever, that changes how you're going to approach the round. And like you can get baited by that if they have good crossfires and they got pings, but like also as a side anchor or something, like not only do you have to focus on your crosshair using your own utility, focusing on how your teammates are going to help you, but now I have to turn around in the middle of a gunfight and like shoot something behind me or above me or something to be able to, have a chance at winning that round. And I think like I like it in terms of like, I appreciate that Riot has done like these things to make their game unique, because I think it's a really cool mix. But I think, CS players when they came over obviously dominated in Valorant, and a lot of them still do. But I truly believe if you don't try to play the game more and more like Valorant, especially as time goes on, you're going to struggle more and more in this game, because you have to accept the fact that it's not Counter-Strike. And I think there have been people that came over from Counter-Strike that have failed because they want to treat it too much like Counter-Strike. And that's not a bad thing. The fundamentals, things like that, are incredible coming from Counter-Strike. But like, it is its separate game. And some of the stuff is bullshit. You have to deal with it. But it's like, that's part of learning a new game and, appreciating a different niche that they've carved out in the space.
I think also to just like add on the point, but kind of link it even closer to your point about League of Legends, Duncan, is like when you're looking at Ultimate specifically, because like the examples that you use there, mCe, like things like like a Sova drone or whatever, like it's still pretty subtle to like comparatively, because though that's just standard utility, right? But then when you're looking at like ultimates, like and you describe like you get like invulnerability and stuff like that in League of Legends, like all this random shit. You have things like, I don't know, like a Killjoy lockdown, which if you get stuck in it, you don't have weapons and you can barely move. A null command from KO means that you can't use your abilities. And these can be really big CC abilities as well. So you can kind of control a whole area with that. But then that adds on to the extra layer of like, okay, well, we know they have a lockdown. We know where the normal place to like put a lockdown is. Like if we're talking about Haven A site, it's probably going to be an A link. Do we have a breach? Does he have an aftershock? Okay, we can shoot it through the wall. Do we have a Sova? He's got his Hunter's Fury. Okay, we can shoot it through the wall. So it's like trying to foresee what's going to be used, ensure that you have what you need to deal with it, and like outdo or know that you can outdo them before they've even used it in the first place. So it's like there's such like a stacked layer of thinking of what you even need to use and have available to you to deal with something that hasn't even fucking happened yet, but if it does happen, could completely change your abilities and what you have available to you as options in that moment. And that is especially when it comes to ultimates. I think, to link back to your previous point, mCe, really especially prevalent in things like post plans.
Yeah, I mean, Killjoy's lockdown, I think, is one of the biggest things. Is you will see people play rounds where that is up completely different. Where if you have the KO Molly, if you have Hunter's Fury, which is the Sova ultimate, if you have Null Command, like you want to use those to prevent it. Or Breach's Aftershock, which destroys it. You might use Aftershock every single time when you hit a site, but when Killjoy has that ability up, all of a sudden you're not using that and you have to save that ability because you're like, okay, I can't use it, guys. We have to use something else to clear this area because I need this for, the Killjoy the Killjoy ultimate, so I can Aftershock it and break it. Because if you don't break that, like it changes your round entirely. It's like, oh, we have a great post plant setup, like lockdown. Well, now we can no longer play that post plant setup, and there's like a more developed line of thinking where it's like people are starting to count if they're 1 kill away, 2 kills away in a round, because like if they get a kill or 2 kills, like all of a sudden that entire round gets flipped on its head because they have these round changing abilities come up, and you have to react, correctly to those. So I think there's a lot more raw reaction in this game than like what it potentially could have been if the abilities and things weren't in there, where it's like you constantly have to be thinking about what's happening, and like sometimes that causes you not to be able to focus on your crosshair as much, and that's where you see rounds break down because you're like, oh shit, like we were going to play here. Our plan has just been ruined by, this ultimate ability. Now we have to completely run out of this bomb site. And the other team knows that, so they're going to peek us towards the end, because if we're not out in time, we get disabled. If we're still, so they have the advantage of forcing you into certain areas, and there's a lot of really cool tricks that develop, where early with Killjoy, you saw people with Molly lineups on Haven and A-Link, where they would throw Mollies through the air to hit the only place you could stand to be out of the lockdown, or you saw the Astra suck stun to pull them into the ultimate because they had to be in a certain corner. So there's really cool lines developed of thinking to deal with that.
To talk a little bit about some of the players in the Guard, the player, again, I'll tie it into our earlier convo. The player who was our favourite it's like we're old school 90s 9-inch Nail fans. We only give a fuck about Trent, mate. It starts and ends with Trent. Because basically that's the player we're a fanboy of, right? But I actually did a little bit of research on this. I was looking up some of your interviews and trying to find some comments you had. And the one thing that really stuck with me, actually, I thought this would be interesting for fans, is they might know, looking in the server, obviously it's a really good player. Wow, look at how interesting his style is and the strength he has on the edges. But one thing I found, as soon as I saw you say this, dude, loads of coaches would love this in a star player, is you said he actually is like himself. Even though he's really young, he is really motivated to study the game, and he writes down his own mistakes and VOD reviews his own games. Now, again, think of what I just said earlier, fans, about how really famous CSGO players who make more money than God don't even watch demos. That's like a coach's dream. If you don't know, most star players, half the bloody argument is them telling you stupid shit like, oh, well, if I hit that headshot, the round goes totally different. It's not the opposite, dude. And they even say if you don't know, behind the scenes, pro players are some shit out of fucking, what you got, Spinal Tap. They are beyond parody. They'll even say shit they'll be like, I don't need to VOD review it, I remember it. You know what I mean? Dude, people don't know how bad pros can be. This guy sounds like a dream if he's a young prodigy and he's fucking studying the game. What more can you ask for?
Yeah, I think his line of thinking is incredible as such a young player, that it was when I first saw him, I was like, oh, do you study the game or whatever? He's like, yeah, I'll watch stuff back with my team and stuff. And he helped him as he was probably 16 at the time, where it's not only does he have this very good mechanical skill, just his instincts or game sense or whatever you want to call it, it's spot on. Some of the things he does, literally, I think the third round of the game, his first match with us was against Steel, and he one of the sickest pre-fire one-taps that I've seen in this game, where he won a 1v2 and Opper was holding him, and he was just like, oh, I bet this guy's holding me, and he literally just, one of the craziest shots I've seen. And that was his first introduction to the scene at large and ours as well, that it's oh my god, this kid is going to be special. Where it's his ability to keep calm and just all these things are, a lot of the time it takes years or whatever to develop some of these things in players, or for them to understand it or really fit in. And for him to be so far advanced at such a young age, and having not played with a great IGL in the world, or coaches or role models or whatever, that's astounding. There are very few people that you find in esports like that are people you can put up on that level. Twist.
Is that why you said that? I noticed you said he was a once in a lifetime player. Yeah. That sounds like you're over egging the pudding, but there's a reason why, right?
Yeah, I've got to work with very talented people throughout my career, including Twist. I played with Twist before he made a professional team in MDL, and it's you see these people and you're like, oh my god, this kid's raw ability. If you can look beyond flaws or whatever, you're like, this kid has the potential to be special someday. Some of those people go on and they do great things, like what Twist has done in Counter-Strike, and some of them fizzle out or they don't reach that potential. But it's great to see that happen, and for them to have good attitudes and things like that moving forward. That I think that's more important than a lot of things, is are you willing to have somebody be like, oh yeah, this is a way you could play this better, and then be like, oh shit, yeah, that is a good point. Or you can be like, hey, you should try to play this Crossfire better, stop chasing ecos, and they're just like, oh fuck you. That's a huge difference in players, and you see both spectrums when you work with young kids and just older adults and stuff like that in general.
Do you have any thoughts on Trent you want to jump in on, Gio?
Yeah, I was actually going to say, like, so obviously Trent is incredibly impressive and it's really cool hearing the way that he's spoken about. But someone who I got to interview was Net. And while he's not like a star player in the same sense that Trent is, and the role that he often takes on is not necessarily going to make him the star player anyway. Listening to him talk about the way he views the game and just how he looks at it and studies and whatnot, like, would you say that there's a lot of similarities between those two? Because I was pretty impressed when I spoke to him, like, especially considering his background where he like played, I think he said he played like lacrosse and stuff in school. He was on the student council. He was doing this at like, he was going to go off to college to do this. And like, he seemed like a really, like one of those kids you look at and you're like, you make me feel really unaccomplished at such a young age. Like,
he's
yeah,
the
he's like,
right.
yeah, he was one of, he's like, you know, that valedictorian kind of like vibe.
Sure.
But like, he's also, you know, he's not like super as old as a number of these people, you know, in esports. I would still consider him, you know, young-ish, not as young as Trent, but like, you know, how do you feel about that? Because I feel like he gets overlooked a little bit in terms of receiving credit for a similar attitude.
I think there's a lot of people on our team in general that are like that get overlooked. That is why this team has been, you know, so special in terms of our rise and things like that. Is you have a bunch of people that nobody really thought about much of as individuals, or, you know, whatever, at different points, that it's like they bought into a system and believe in each other, and they, you know, put in the necessary work in spaces where it's like Net, we played a new split comp, and Net was like, you know, I've watched these guys play this, because he'll watch the individual roles that he plays from better players and then watch what they're doing and try to, you know, soak that up. So it's like, how can I be better? I'm going to watch this guy. I'm going to see what they do. I'm going to break this down. And he actually brought a new comp to us that he was like, guys, I really think we can do this. And I like kind of laughed. I was like, I don't know. Like, this is going to be rough. And he sat there and he's like literally explaining it. He's like, no. He's like, I'm pretty sure this is why they play the way they do. They're trying to deny this. They're doing this. Like, watch, like, when they do this. And he's like, I'm like, okay, let's watch this together. And like, as we're watching it, he's like breaking down the different things in it, that he's like, okay, you know, watch, like they do this because of this, and when this happens, this. So it's like that understanding is very, very good. And like, he is a very hard worker, that he's like, I'm going to try to be the best player in the world. And he's not just saying that, he's trying to put the steps in to become that. And that's what a lot of people are lacking. That it's like, if people listen to our comms videos, they know Mike does a lot of, you know, secondary calling, or, you know, motivation, or like things like that, that I will take a player like that over somebody that frags out a lot of the time, because you have to have these necessary pieces inside of a team, or else it's going to fall apart. You can't put 5-star players together and, you know, get results. Sometimes you can, but like a lot of the time, if you get one or two guys that you're like, okay, they're going to be the guys that everyone's going to look at in terms of mCe and Trent. But, you know, I have Jonah that can flex everything I ever need him to and never complains about it. Gets overlooked. Net is one of the better Sentinel players in North America right now. That it's like, if Chamber wasn't a thing, you would see that more and more. That it's like, they get overlooked. So they come from other teams and they're star players on other teams. And they have to go through this shift where it's like, you know, if you truly want to win and that's what you care about, sometimes you can't have all the attention on you, or like as much. Mm-hmm. And the people that can buy into those systems are going to be the ones that go on to be, you know, great players. And the ones that can't, that they're constantly like, oh, well, like, I'm mad that this guy's getting attention and I'm not. Like, yes, there's a chip on everyone's shoulder and you're always going to have that happen, but like, those players are just as special. It's just they don't get the credit they deserve a lot of the time. And, you know, people like, you know, Kerrigan. Would FaZe be good without Kerrigan? Yes, they would be good. Would they have won a title without Kerrigan? No fucking way. Absolutely not. Yeah. That, you know, you don't respect things until they aren't there, or you put somebody else in that you're like, oh, this guy on paper is better, but like, oh, why aren't we winning anymore? Like, oh, you got rid of Steele, who would like helped you, like, oh, you're in a good spot to qualify for the World Championship. Let's just get rid of him before the LCQ. Like, oh shit, why did my team fail? Like, there's way more that goes on than people understand, and like every single player on teams, they're there for reasons. Like they're not just lucky to get in some. I mean, some of them are, their names and everything, they carry it on. But like as this game goes on more and more, you're going to see the people get weeded out like that, and the people that truly care and put in the effort are going to be the ones that stay.
I feel like there's. Yeah. Oh, sorry, just to interrupt. Like, I feel like you just see time and time again in all sorts of esports, and there's always going to be teams that do this. And I honestly, it just never seems to work. And that is the teams that decide, you know what, our budget this year, like we're going to make a super team. But their idea of making a super team is getting 5 quote unquote star players, and then everyone wonders why it doesn't work. It's because they're not greater than the sum of their parts. And it never, and it's always like the team that comes along and has maybe some like unknowns or some fresher faces along with maybe some veterans, and they just have really good synergy, a coach that works well for them. It's always that team that outdoes this hyper expensive team made of like all of the biggest names. And it's still like, it blows me away whenever I hear people who are like, you know what would make a really great team is like if we got this person. It's like, that's not how it works. It's not how it works.
I would even say, though, that's where, like, pro players are lucky that some of these convos always stay private. Because I tell you what, if you let pro players make teams, Gio, they would make so many of exactly these, like, pleb-level teams with, like, he's the best as well, but I'm the best, but we're all the best. It's like, the joke is half of them don't know themselves until they're 6 months out of a team. Like, oh, bloody hell, that guy really did create all the space when I was, like, the player coming in. Or, like, wow, I won every clutch because, you know, that guy comped to me properly and I knew where people were. Like, half this shit, like, people don't realise how much, like, even pro players themselves can be mad delusional on that stuff. Like, I've seen them actually push within teams to have someone kicked out and then upgrade to their friend who's a star player, and then you later find out, like, oh, you idiot, he doesn't even play that spot on that map, though. It's our best map, though. Like, that was the CT spot that we've just kicked that guy. Or the best one is, like, actually, the thing we were saying earlier about utility is a great one. If people only knew how many players get, like, an extra 6 months or a year in a team, because they're just the one who knows all the smokes. Like, there are so many of that guy's teammates have just told him, and in the modern meta, by the way, you can even now and say, is go throw the bloody util. That guy can have another job for another year. Like, the joke is, like, in that scenario, it's like he says, if we're playing, like, Nuke or something, if you don't know how to do this specific outside smoke, we're actually fucked. Like, if there's only 2 of us do, our job suddenly becomes a lot more valuable. These are the areas, by the way, that people who are just good at the game don't stop and think about. They think to shoot people in the head is all the game's about still.
That was like a dream come true. I saw that like update in the smokes and being able to drop grenades, and I was like, if I was still a player, this is like
every IGL sport. That's the dream.
Oh my god! It's like I would throw full executes by myself and just let these young guys just run out, take heads. Or like you have 2 people that are throwing like 4 smokes that like. When that first happened, I like got excited and giddy that I was like, oh my god, this could be such a cool idea. But even now, you rarely see some teams like truly take advantage.
It's not utilized that much.
Which is crazy to me. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question. It is not on the topic of smokes in CS, so this is moving away a little bit. But one thing that was discussed a lot when you guys went to Masters, which obviously in and of itself was a really huge thing, was a number of people theorized that if the Guard had not have had a bye, i.e. if you hadn't have won or hadn't have come into the finals of NA, that you would have maybe had a better chance of going further in the bracket at Masters because a number of your players had no LAN experience, and that would have been a good way for them to kind of get used to the environment. Do you personally think that that was a notable reason as to your performance at Masters? And what were your expectations and takeaways from that experience?
I think it's not fair to say that because we could have played groups in 102. Like you honestly don't know. I think the thing people overlook and they're like, oh, they went there and they bombed out or whatever, which like, yes, to be fair, we did, but it's like we choked against Optic. We were up, 11-5. We messed up an execute, and if we won, or 10-5 or 10-4 or whatever it was, that it's like, if we ran the execute correctly on the Marv Days round, we would have won that game 13-4, 13-5, 13-6, 7, whatever you want to call it. We would have won that game. And if I think even they would admit that. Like they could have brought it back, but like for us, I know for a fact if we would have won that, we would have won that game. And then you have a completely different outcome. I don't think we lose to, some of these teams where it's like we had played some of them in practice and played very well. We were playing Gambit, we were playing Ascend, we were playing these teams even and exceptionally well. We smoked some of these, upper tier EU teams as well. We were in a very good place. Paper Rex, I feel like that's where the nerves really came in, that it was like, you don't play that playstyle very often where they just absolutely run it down. And one of the things you forget about on land, your sound isn't as good. Like, that's something I haven't been at a LAN in since Flashpoint. And I completely forgot that, like, in-ears, yeah, you can run an extra, that's a known thing for LAN players. You can run an extra couple steps usually and they can't hear you.
You can do a lot more rush play if people don't get it.
Yes.
Like, you know, whereas at home you just hear all your perfect sounds, no background thing. The mixture of all the complications of being on stage, etc., just mean that you get like famously, this is even used to be a real thing at Counter-Strike. Back in the day, if you ever had a tournament that was at one of those trade fairs, you just rush all the time, mate, because they can't hear the flashes going off. They can't hear, every sound cue doesn't go through.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing like at tournaments where if you were sitting across from people, like, you would see people's faces light up when you flash them. Like, there's so many little things like that. And just, if you've never been yelled at LAN, if you, like, you know, this is your first big LAN, you use a big round, and like, you're like, oh, normally you'd be like, oh yeah, we're okay. But like, you have the other team standing up and screaming at you. Like, are you ready for things like that? And like,
sounds like the Paper X example was a good one though, dude, because of all the styles you wouldn't want to face if you're in this setting like that. It sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, especially you don't play that. The closest that we had was early phase, and like, even then, it's not the same. Like, there's no style in the world that really prepares you for, you know, what Paper X does. That it's like, oh yeah, we're just gonna hit, you know, out main here with double duelist in the first like 10 seconds. We don't care what's going on. And it's like, there was a thing in the Paper X game that they took a timeout in the first map, and I thought for sure, I was like, okay, they're going to make an adjustment to what we're doing. We'd rattled off like, you know, five rounds in a row or something doing the exact same thing. So we're like, okay, they're going to make an adjustment for this. So let's do this to counter that or try it. They didn't do anything. I don't even know what they talked about during the timeout. Like, we could have run the exact same thing 10 rounds in a row, and I think we would have won, like, they wouldn't have changed. Like, it was mind-blowing to me. And I'm sure they talked about things and they had reasons or whatever. And fuck, for all I know, they could have taken a timeout and been like, yeah, they're going to overthink this, guys. Let's just talk about fucking
mind game you. Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's just a mind game. They're like, oh shit, we're having trouble stopping this. Let's take a timeout, fucking joke about it, and maybe they'll stop doing that thing. Like, they could have a line of thinking that's like that, because you watch their bind. Oh my god, their bind is so sick. The way they play the Yoru with setting up flashes through the teleporter and things like that. Those guys are so advanced, and they don't get credit for, like, they're just like, oh yeah, these guys are idiot, they run it down. Like, no, watch their games. Watch their games. Some of the stuff they do, the setups in these rounds are so sick. But, like, if you don't get experience playing against that, it's very hard to live adjust. And the Ghost game on Haven was the same thing, where it's like, we loaded into that match, we saw the comp they were running, and we're like, holy shit, like, attack is about to be brutal. But if we can make it to defense, we averaged, 10 plus rounds against comps like this because they're very heavy on one side. But, like, we got embarrassed and made to look a fool against some of these things, even though it's like you're one round away or like one big swing round away from like potentially winning those matches. But back to the Iceland thing, the biggest thing was we played fucking Optic our first round. Very good chance we win that. We would have went on, and I'm not saying we would have won the event, but we would have done well. Our confidence would have been at an all-time high. We would have continued riding that, and I think we would have, placed very, very well. Our expectations going into that event were, we wanted to play up to our level. I don't really care about results, and I know that sounds dumb, but like, if we can play at 80% or better of what we're capable of, the rest will follow. And like, that's what we've preached a lot of this time. And like, our expectations were to go there and win. Like, we wanted to win the whole thing.
Sure.
But it's like, this is your first land, things like this. There's so many different things that like you don't accommodate for. And like, we just wanted to show up and play well. Everything else, it didn't matter. Like, as long as we went there and performed well, you don't have to look back on that for the rest of your life. And like, now, unfortunately, we do have to have that chip on our shoulder where it's like, oh shit, we really threw that. Like, we should have had map 3. We should have, this whole story should have been different. And like, for the rest of our lives, now we have to, deal with that. You have to look back and be like, God, like, the what ifs or whatever. And it's pretty brutal to like have that result,
I think you're onto something there with the philosophy coaching style, though, of like not being like it's about the win or the loss in the column. Because I actually think in general, like if people haven't thought it through, that causes more problems than it's worth. Like I'll give you an example. What happens if you win the game, but you made all these stupid mistakes and errors, and you actually misplayed against a guy, and he almost beat you with a like dropping 40 or something like? In that scenario, you shouldn't feel great about winning that game. Maybe you're supposed to win easily and neutralize this guy. So like, and obviously, although you can have the other one, you can have a loss where you actually play awesome. You get in the site, you get a million post plants. Someone wins a miracle, couple of 1v1s, or does a fucking sick ult at a point in time. Like, as a coach, you don't want people focusing just on the W or the L. You want them to make, essentially, the calls that make sense within your philosophy, right?
Yeah, and it's the same thing ecos. Like, if you win an eco with one person alive, like, you've lost that round. I don't care. Like, and I think, you know, people sometimes they'll win those matches and be like, oh yeah, we won. They don't care about it. Or like, I think you'll see better teams and better players go back and be like, guys, we have to cut this down, or whatever. And it's like, you either win or you learn, is how I've always said it. But you cannot, like, a lot of these rounds, I learned this back in CS, it's like, if you win a 4v1 or a 5v1 with one person alive, like, you guys fucked up. There's no way around that. Like, that should never happen, and you have to be critical on that. But one thing I've had to get better at through the years is I'm really bad at, you know, praising the good things. I'm very good at picking out the bad things and, like, doing that. But, like, there's a lot of times, especially in this game, where you play a round to perfection. Like, you do everything right, you set up your lurks, your default works, and, like, you just lose the round. And, like, that's one thing I've had to learn to point out, especially to a young team, is, like, that was perfect, guys. We play that round 10 times, we win that the other 9 times. Like, do not think that was bad here. Just, you know, they got a kill off Rocket, or we got, you know, a bit unfortunate with timing. We got collided by an op. Like, so many things can go wrong so fast, but it's like, that was still an excellent round by us. And, like, we have to remember, like, even when you lose some rounds, like, that doesn't mean it was a bad round or you did bad things. It happens, you know?
It's like remembering there are 2 teams in the server. Like, It's not your fault for everything that happens.
Yeah, sure. And just, you know, being able to credit other teams. So many people are like, oh, these guys are idiots. Why are they doing this? Blah, 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 blah. It's like, if you actually took the time to, like, set aside your ego and look at, like, yes, they may not have been doing it exactly right or, you know, the right way, but, like, try to understand why they did what they did. And sometimes they have no reason. They are idiots, like, by all means. But most of the time it's like, oh shit, they were trying to do this, or like this was their goal. And it's like, that's another step of development as a player, is being able to not be like, oh, these guys are just dumb. They would never do this, like, da 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 da. It's like, oh shit, these guys are trying to set up a tile trap. That's what they're doing. Like, and then it just advances your line of thinking and everything the next step, where it's like, instead of being mad that they, like, randomed you or got lucky or, you know, all these bullshit keywords that people use, it's like, oh, they were trying to do this, let's do this. Or, like, when we see this is their goal, let's counter that. And, like, it's a healthier line of thinking, and you're going to be a step ahead by trying to do that. And a lot of players just don't get that.
One player on your team that we haven't mentioned yet, but I'd love to ask you about, is the Korean player, Sire player, because obviously Gio knows him from his time in Overwatch. I have to say, this guy, low-key, was actually one of my favourite players in Overwatch, mate. And the reason why is, like, he essentially, as far as I can tell, is just what his career story was in Overwatch. He's just the ultimate mercenary. People don't know, he was brought into a team that at the time was all bloody, like, Finnish and Scandinavian. He was a lone Korean. They brought him in, but he played Widowmaker, which essentially, if you're a tactical, he's just the AWPer, essentially. And all he did was, he was what you want your dream AWPer to be in a bad team. He just didn't give a fuck how anyone else played, if they were winning or losing. He just hits his AWP shots, dude. He just hits his shots. All he does, he's like, that's why I say he's like a mercenary, like in the war sense. Like, he's the guy on his, like, 4th tour of Vietnam who's just there to, like, just point me in the direction, tell me what time the helicopter go. Exactly. And then he just goes off, and you don't even ask, was he okay? You just assume he got the 1,000 yards there. He must just be okay at Sire player, right? Who is he in Valorant though, dude? Because now he's in a real team. In theory, I mean, I know he's been through the hard times of the fucking Team 1 experience and that. Who is he now though? It feels like he's finally got a real team.
I think the thing that is different about us is, from the very beginning, we have a manager that is fluent in Korean as well, and English. Okay. And he was brought in before I was, and then I was brought in by him in management or whatever. So when we first started looking at a Korean player, one of my main goals was, like, no matter what happens between me and our manager, we need to try to include him in as many things, make him feel welcome. Like if we go to the store, if we go get a drink, just be like, hey, do you want to come? Because like I can't imagine living that far away from my home. Like even though I'm not like where I grew up around friends or family or whatever, I'm still like a couple hour plane ride away. Like I can't imagine going to a different country with a different language than what I primarily speak. So like I think the difference for us with him was like from day one we wanted to include him and like make him feel comfortable, which I can't speak for T1. I don't know. But it was a very important note for us to make that possible. And I think the good thing about the team is all of them get along. They like each other. Like they hang out, they do things, and like because of that, I think Sai has been able to come out of his shell more and like be himself, and like he does truly feel comfortable in a lot of these situations, and I think it shows with his play. Like he's a phenomenal player. Like his mechanical ability, some of the stuff he hits,
That's bonkers, isn't he?
No, it's crazy. And he'll hit a shot, and I'm like, oh my god, Sai, like how the fuck did you hit that? And he was like, oh, that one was easy. Or like he'll miss a shot, and I'm like, Sai, it's okay, that was a tough shot. And he's like, no, like I should hit that like every day of the week. So it's, I mean, he's just supremely talented. He is, you know, your poster child for a lot of things that it's like he's a Korean esports player. Like his professionalism, everything like that is top tier. Like he's very good in a lot of those aspects, and like he's, you know, fit in, and you know, it's been perfect. We're the island of misfit toys over here, and like everything just works. So like we've done well despite, you know, struggling recently. It's like we're still on the right track to be a good team.
By the way, he's one of those players where, I don't know if you remember this, Gio, but when Overwatch first began, it was one of those games where people had that stereotype when they said Koreans aren't that good at FPS games. And it's like, he's the sort of player where I'm like, mate, just watch them warm up for like 10 minutes and you'll have a very different opinion afterwards. Yes. Like, they're just bonkers. Essentially, they just, like, the joke is, I wish they all played CSGO. I wish I could just hypnotize everyone in the world to only play CSGO. Because I want these guys in CSGO. I want like fucking Jonak. I want all these guys. It'd be amazing.
Jonak in CSGO.
It'd be sick, wouldn't it? Who wouldn't want to see that? Well, I want them all.
It's so cool because I've always talked about, you know, like ZywOo came out of nowhere. Like, you know, Trent has come out of nowhere. Like these players, I've always said, like, we don't even know who the best player is. One of the best Counter-Strike players of all time might have been a fucking Olympic athlete. And instead of, you know, like, you never know. So it's like, all these people that they're like, oh no, I'm not going to give this guy a shot until he gets more experience. It's like, you're in fucking Maine, dude. What the fuck do you mean? Like, why would you not take a shot on like one of these players? And like, I've never understood that. But like, you know, you see these people come in like Sai and you're like, oh my God. Like it just, the things he does consistently, like how quick his decision making is and stuff. You're like, holy fuck. Like these guys are, I could never dream to be like on the level of some of these guys, man.
One of the things that we have spoken about before, but it's been spoken about outside of this as well, is the fact that because of Saya's, particularly his experience in the Overwatch League, he has a ton of LAN experience, right? So how is his, you know, I suppose veteranship in a sense of playing in front of an audience and being on LAN and whatever, how has that like affected the rest of the team? Has he kind of been that pillar for some of the rookies to sort of I don't know, like lean on in a sense?
I think a little bit. I think he's very good at managing himself. I think if he was a native English speaker, he would be able to provide more of that, you know, feedback or things to like help more. Like he does really well with it, but like it's hard for him to be like, oh yeah, at LAN, you know, jitters, anything like this, like you're going to have to be ready for that. Where it's like, he's going to help. But the one thing that's great about Sai is like, no matter what, you know, he's taken care of. Like he's on LAN, he's going to do everything possible for us to win. So like, even if the other guys are struggling a little bit, like they're going to do their best to, like, you know, he does the best that he can, even if like it's going to affect his performance, to try to help like other people out as well.
Okay. Oh, by the way, one thing I want to ask about in general is, right, I've got sort of the wrap-up topic here. We're coming towards the end of our time anyway, so I thought this was like a good open-ended topic. You both give me your thoughts on it, but I'll start with you, mCe. Right, one of the things I'm already looking to, because I've been in this industry long enough to know these things, right, is I remember as soon as I even started watching Valorant being like, ooh, this circuit seems a bit small for how many people want to be in Valorant, though. Like, wait a minute, it's for all the regions in the world as well. Like, I think that is about to get, as far as I can tell, every VCT season or whatever, stage rather, is it's going to get worse and worse in the sense that, like, if people don't get it, it's like the game musical chairs. You have 40 people trying to get in like 8 chairs. Like, this isn't going to, just for NA alone, this is not going to work. Like, think about this, mCe, right? Even just trying to have a talk show, right? I've done all these episodes at the beginning of this talk show when it launched only a few months ago that are about like version 1 or like, what about these? Like, they're not even in VCT now. Like, these people can go from like they're a contender to make it to the LAN to like they're not even in it for 3 to 6 months. Like, to me, if you're a fan trying to follow, the whiplash is crazy. If you're actually someone trying to be in the industry though, like, it feels like there must be the amount of pressure on certain matches that aren't even the matches when you get to the LAN, feeling like essentially some of the Open qualifier matches are the most important matches of the year for some of these teams. Like, it seems like there must be a very interesting circumstance to be in. Like, what's your vibe in this sense? Because I get the vibe if you hear the talk about the franchise and stuff and look at who's getting teams. Like, you notice this last VCT one was where a lot more orgs really started to put the pedal down to the floor more on bigger names, sign the squads. It feels like everything's going to a fever pitch, dude. And like I say with the musical chairs analogy, a lot of people are going to be left like missing out when this thing ends, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think people had unrealistic expectations of like what was going to happen in terms of orgs being irresponsible and different things like that. Because like my idea of what was going to happen is I always, from the beginning of the time, was looking at LEC, LCK, like LCS, 10 to 12 teams, something like that. That was my expectation. So it's like we need to be inside this top 8 to have a chance at, getting a chance, because we can't be a borderline team because your T1s of the world, your TSMs, like all these huge names are gonna get those spots, I feel like. And then they came out and they're like, oh, by the way, like 4, 6, what, and everyone's like, wait, what? And like that's fair because that reaction is warranted, but like a lot of these teams that were like 20th ranked teams, 25th ranked teams, it's like, what did you honestly expect was gonna happen? Like, you can't let everybody into a franchise league or whatever. I hope the ecosystem they have plans for in terms of a challenger league or like academy leagues, or like I really hope there's another plan on top of this, and I hope that they're listening to some of the feedback, because I think this is a very big like fork in the road of how the game's going to go. Depending on what happens in the next 6 months or whenever it happens, I think you're going to see either a lot of successful things, or you're potentially going to see like a pretty drastic turnaround of how your game's ecosystem is working. But yeah, pressure-wise, there's definitely pressure. You want to be one of the top teams because, like, we're a new org, we're a new team, whatever. Like, if we're not one of those, what else do we have? Like, we offer content. We probably do the best content of any of the teams out there right now. And we've put in the work to try to do these little things well. But it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, God knows how much money TSM has spent on the LCS and things like that, like, are they really going to choose us even if we have a better team, we have better content, we have all these better things? So, like, yeah, there's definitely uncertainty and it's worrying, but you can't think about it. We have too much shit going on. Like, we're trying to qualify to Copenhagen. We have to win our match this week to make playoffs. Like, there's so much going on that, like, you just kind of try to ignore it and, like, push it back down, and, like, you're, like, just hoping it works out. But a lot of these people have, fever dreams of grandeur that it's like, no, you never had a chance, you'll never have a chance, but like you have to get yourselves in a position to do that, and all these top teams did it. Like, they cut storied players, huge name players, and they're like, no, this isn't going to work, we can't do this, we have to go with a different approach, and like all those teams have been successful now, so it's pretty crazy to see.
Yeah, I mean, I agree definitely with the sentiment that, like, if, a top 20, top 25 team, it is sort of like, yeah, what do you expect? I think it's an interesting one because, yes, now that Valorant have announced their new format for next year, and also the fact that the selection process of the teams who are going to be in the, like, tier 1 portion of that format is going to be different from what we saw in, for example, the LCS, where the teams bought in for, 13 million, something like that. And so it's not actually going to be the teams who are buying the spots now. So basically Riot are going to be able to handpick who they want.
Okay.
So it is going to be a different selection process, and that's going to be interesting to find more out about. But because these first 2 years, and by the time the new format starts, it's going to be pretty much the first 3 years of the game's life cycle. hasn't been franchised, then yes, it has been a fight for everyone to get into those top spots, because even though your standing in VCT right now is not necessarily going to mean anything as for whether or not you get picked to be in the franchise league or, pseudo franchise league, the organizations involved in Valorant right now still need to make that money. Like they can't just have gone those 3 years or 2 years without making anything. So that's why there has been that real like dog eat dog sense, which comes from like this really ruthless of cutting of players and stuff like that you mentioned, because the only way to make money in Valorant is to be one of the top teams, really, because it's not other than for Champions team, there hasn't been any form of revenue share for people. So they need the visibility. And then of course, like having the visibility and making the content and proving that you're, a good org to your players is probably going to put you in a better standing with Riot and a higher likelihood of being involved with Valorant long term. And so I think there have been a lot of teams or a lot of orgs that have seen the potential longevity with Valorant and as a potentially good investment for the future. And they are trying to put themselves in the forefront so that they can be in that conversation. But it's obviously like rough for players who, don't see it from the business perspective. They are just like, I want to be one of the top players in Valorant. Like I need to be on a great team. I need to, whatever. And the development options that have been there have not necessarily being as conducive to players who are not decidedly at the very top to build. Because, think of obviously all the shit that happened with 100 Thieves. Players who are brought onto the team could have ended up being really good, but 100 Thieves couldn't afford to take that risk. That was ultimately like what happened, right? Because of the format. So I think while I don't necessarily feel that much for like teams who are in the the top 20 whatever and really hoping that they can get there, because I think that ultimately it's an investment from the org perspective. It is kind of sad for the players who don't necessarily look at it through the lens of the business model that it's trying to be. And I do hope that the new format, I'm optimistic about the new format. I do hope that the new format is going to provide a lot more structure for players to really build. I guess the closest thing that we can really compare it to right now is maybe the format we have in like European League of Legends, where you have the kind of franchise top league and then you've got the ERLs. That's kind of what they're looking to implement in at least the top 2 tiers of this new format. But they want to do that in every region. And that's something, I actually wrote an article about this week. That's something that in the NA region, in basically any esport, hasn't been there. So in my opinion, implementing that kind of structure could actually be a huge fucking boon to a region that oftentimes has its sub tier 1 kind of neglected a little bit. And I think that's been a real big problem for the LCS. And that's why you don't get a lot of native NA talent grow into the LCS and it's all imports. So I think it's been a rough time. It's almost like the puberty of Valorant right now, which has meant things are shaky for teams who are not definitively in that, let's say, top 6 of their region, but with the new format and the structure that comes with it, hopefully that means that there is more structure supported lower than even just the top tier that is going to provide a lot more like clarity and stability for players and organizations alike.
This episode was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio, Rajcula, Kyle R, Travis Goff, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Hades, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Pacy, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Thooorin, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and as always, special thanks goes out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Want to suggest a topic or a guest? Would you like to ask a question in one of those AMAs I do? Maybe you want to find out who the upcoming guests are for my interviews, or you'd like to be part of one of those long discussions with yours truly. Well, if any of these perks appeal to you or others, check out the description box link below to Patreon and put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today.